If you've seen any of the John Wick movies, you'd know that video games have been a major inspiration in one way or another. The way John guns down, slashes, and beats the ever-loving hell out of everyone is as methodical as it is flashy, kind of like certain parts of some video games. There are a lot of John Wick-like games out there, but today we're highlighting ones that specifically give off that whole vibe. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's kick off this list with SuperHot. This is a first-person shooter if somehow you haven't heard of it. It's independently made and it's super unique. Time only moves when you move, and that mechanic is exactly why we're talking about it in the context of John Wick. The John Wick movies are known for extremely intricate, extremely cool, extremely long action sequences that flow about as well as any other action movie ever. SuperHot gives you the ability to think things through in a way that no other game really does, and that's why it reminds me of John Wick more than other games. I'm not saying like the whole thing, I'm saying different mechanics. I don't know, like the movie John Wick as a whole would be pretty hard to do. For one thing, it's a third-person shooter. For another thing, it has a story. And for another thing, it does not have the time moves only when you move mechanic. And that's kind of why I want to see that in games. There's plenty of games that allow you to slow down time, but just the unique idea of nothing moving forward unless you're moving forward too is, again, what makes it remind me of John Wick the most, despite not cribbing from the movie in direct or overt ways. Up next is Hotline Miami. This is a top-down shooter from 2012. It is set in 1989, 3 years prior to the year of my birth. This one's a little more like if John Wick belonged to not such a great guy. The protagonist of this game is not a good man, whereas, although John Wick is an assassin, he's not an evil character, and the movie itself goes out of its way to show he has a code of ethics. All that aside though, if you're talking about the action of the movie John Wick, Hotline Miami is a very similar game in a lot of ways. Obviously, you don't have time stop mechanics or anything, but the idea of quickly dispatching targets before moving to the next in a fast-paced, flowing kind of movement is in both games. I will say Hotline Miami is much less forgiving. You die in one hit, and it's a very challenging game, particularly on the initial runs where you don't know what's happening, where anybody is, or who's going to fire on you from where and when. The sequel is also worth mentioning. It's essentially the same idea as the first, with various extensions and improvements. Again, both of these games aren't really cribbing from John Wick. They came out too early to do that. They're both fairly close and similar enough that aspects of them would have probably been apparently inspired by John Wick if they had come out after. Maybe not the aesthetic and story stuff. Again, we've got more of an anti-hero at best in the plot of these games, and frankly, in some ways a little closer to the Joker from The Dark Knight and how he goes about his business. Although certainly not in personality, and his business is not the same. He's not an anarchist, he's an assassin. Coming in next is John Wick Hex. If you're looking for a game that attempts to capture the vibe of John Wick in terms of its action and prowess, this would probably be the first game to go to. It is an overt attempt to simulate how John Wick goes about these action scenes. However, it's not the largest game ever. It doesn't have a story that's of such depth that you'd want to play it if you're not trying to get that vibe. It's a strategy game, interestingly enough. It is also a game that attempts to create something similar to the SuperHot mechanic, but not in the exact same way. Essentially, all of the action is divided into discrete bits of time. Every time you do something, it takes a certain amount of time. Enemies are doing the same thing, so you have to plan meticulously, ensure you're not out in the open, and make sure you're not performing an action while an enemy is shooting. It's an interesting game, and in some ways is like SuperHot, but where SuperHot stops are instant, this game divides stuff up into these discrete time intervals. As I've said, you plan your actions based on how long they take, their probability of success, and whether or not they put you in a vulnerable position. It's a cool game, one that you might expect would have been a first or third person shooter, or frankly a shooter of any kind, but it's not. It's a strategy game. Next on the list, we have Midnight Fight Express, one of my sleeper favorite games to be frank. It's essentially a brawler or a beat 'em up, but it also has a lot of shooter elements. It's very similar to Hotline Miami, except it's in full 3D. You can lock onto targets, it's cribbing from various other things too. It's a fast-paced game, especially for the younger among us who might not necessarily think of a brawler first. Although Sifu does kind of bring back that old school brawler vibe, Midnight Fight Express has a lot more shooting in it, despite being a little bit of a faster game, in terms of the actual movements and actions you take. Next up is Sifu, a more recent game, a hardcore beat 'em up. This one is very clearly attempting to draw from John Wick. For one, it has similar kinds of combat, albeit hand to hand. He doesn't shoot, though there are improvised weapons. There's fighting, or should I say kung fu, through nightclubs and various levels that resemble the environments in the original John Wick movie. Obviously, you're looking at the combat as well, which again isn't necessarily a direct copy of what you would see in the John Wick movies. Hand to hand, it's adapted, it's different, it's made a little bit more usable as a combat system. But it looks very similar to, for instance, the stuff in the nightclub scene, which in the movie also includes guns, although not necessarily in Sifu. Sifu is probably one of the more clear attempts to draw from John Wick. It's a much smaller game than a lot of others it could draw from, but it does what it does extremely well. And it's evocative of the movie in a way that, even though it doesn't have guns, you'd probably still want to play it if that's the kind of action vibe you're looking for.
I just love talking about Red Dead Redemption 2.
Sure, you might think of Red Dead Redemption 2 as kind of a slower, more methodical type of game, and yeah, it definitely is, especially with the story stuff. The main plot, you're just kind of soaking everything up. But when it comes to the combat, you do have options. In the open world, you could play like a maniac or a John Wick type character if you want. Just go in guns blazing, use every trick in the book, or get a little cinematic, dual wielding guns, or being really quick and sneaky when taking out a place. Completely stealth isn't necessarily the main thing here. You're not like Solid Snake or anything, but you can get into a building, sneak around, and take out some people fairly quietly if you want. Really, the general tools and the feel make it kind of like a Western John Wick if you just want to go out there and play that way. Plus, you know, you'd throw some cowboy in it. Also worth noting, the hand-to-hand combat here, by today's video game standards, is still really solid and a lot of fun. There isn't a crazy amount of it, but when you're using it in cinematic story moments, it's awesome. Or just when screwing around in the open world. What more can we say about Red Dead Redemption 2? If you still haven't played it, give it a whirl. And if you're someone who just likes to play around in video games, start fights, and use guns and weapons, you know, have fun with combat systems, this one might actually appeal to you. The next game is Splinter Cell Blacklist. This is actually the game that, in my opinion, reminds me of John Wick the most, at least in part. It's the last Tom Clancy Splinter Cell game, the 6th one, and as you know, they're primarily stealth games. The whole idea is not getting noticed. Where it reminds me of John Wick is specifically the execution mechanic. You mark 3 targets and eliminate them in a very, very short amount of time by moving, shooting, and flowing in a way that's very similar to what happens in John Wick. The rest of the gunplay isn't necessarily that reminiscent of it. Obviously, lots of games allow you to move and shoot. That's the point of a shooter. There are very few shooters where you just stand in place while shooting, and if you do move, it barely matters. Next up is the Hong Kong Massacre, an indie top-down shooter from 2019. It's in a lot of ways similar to Hotline Miami. Obviously, it draws a bit from that, but it's a lot closer to the movie John Wick. Clear inspiration from that. Not necessarily attempting to be the specific movie in the same ways, we're talking about a similar setup, an attack on the triads versus an attack on the Yakuza there. But it's similar in some ways, I guess. It also attempts to integrate the SuperHot mechanics without really going as far or being exactly similar. It's more of a bullet time type thing. Time moves very slowly, you're able to shoot in a more directed, methodical way, and you move quickly. The Hong Kong Massacre is kind of like the movie John Wick, where if you slowed down all those parts, he would have been vulnerable and probably would have gotten shot. The parts where he's moving very quickly and attacking multiple targets, you slow those down and speed up everything else, like when he's just moving from room to room, stuff like that. You know, if you successfully inserted that bullet time mechanic into a movie, they definitely would have done that if they could have gotten away with it somehow. Next over, one of the more underappreciated ones. It's Watch Dogs Legion. Now, before this thing was updated to not get any more updates and shelved off from Ubisoft forever, it still stands as a pretty interesting game. It's not for everybody, but what it does and what it tries to accomplish is still pretty impressive. Of course, you're hacking, you're using drones, you're using technology to take down enemies in the shadows like a John Wick style secretive type person. But what was also surprisingly good was the hand-to-hand melee combat. It's not like the deepest thing in the world, but just the animations and a lot of the moves are really reminiscent of moves Keanu Reeves pulls off in the John Wick movies. They look very similar. The way you can counter an opponent and then spin them around and use a gun is really familiar feeling, and I remember that sticking out to me immediately when the game first came out. So here, if you want to be like John Wick, not necessarily with just the melee stuff, but it's there. You know you got the John Wick moves, but also the ability to hack absolutely everything in sight and use advanced technology, well, this is a good one. It actually does the hacking thing better than a lot of other games. Coming in next is Sleeping Dogs. To start off, The melee combat is the star here. There are lots of options to take down the enemies, but among all of them, I love how you can use the environment to put them down. Using the aquarium, tables, and many more to drop your enemies is really giving me a John Wick vibe. You could throw a guy through a window or into a vent, slam a guy on a table, toss a guy in a dumpster, or just use a big pipe you ripped out of the wall to beat down a guy. There's a lot of environmental variety, which again, just makes it feel more like that movie version of fighting. That isn't to say just the hand-to-hand stuff is fun. Shooting also has some pretty great John Wick moments, especially in cutscenes, where the game really gets flashy. But even in gameplay, you can slide down banisters while shooting, dive through the air in slow motion, and use all kinds of random objects for cover. The game allows you to get creative, which is always fun. It's just satisfying putting these big jerks on the floor and beating them down. So while the game isn't all that like John Wick, and the story is not really similar outside of the Hong Kong setting from the beginning of the movie, the fighting really evokes that same energy. Next on the list is Hitman 3. These games allow you to embody the supreme assassin aspect of John Wick like no other game. Agent 47 has a very different vibe compared to John Wick, but what they do isn't all that dissimilar. And of all the games on this list, Hitman is the only one where you can play as a guy in a nice suit. These games are more about stealth, at least when you're playing normally. It is possible to just go on a shooting rampage, and the game does actually allow it, but doing that is missing the whole point of the game. Hitman is all about stalking your prey, waiting for the opportune moment to strike, and eliminating the target in such a way that no one but the target even knows anything happened. Where these games capture the John Wick vibe is just how methodical you can be, how you can plan out your moves, and how you can strike with precision. That's what's so fun about the modern Hitman games. You really get to feel like a constant professional while playing. Next, we have Metal Gear Solid 5. It's not like Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, is even remotely inspired by John Wick in any way. But if you want to screw around and play the game like you're him, you totally can. Guns and shooting are spectacular in this game. The mechanics are second to none, giving you a ridiculous array of tools and weapons to play around with. But what's really fun about this game is using all that, either going full-on lethal or non-lethal, but embracing the John Wick energy to completely wipe out an entire base just expertly and efficiently. On top of all the shooty stuff, the game does have pretty decent hand-to-hand combat mechanics that allow you to leap into a group of guys and take them all down pretty quickly. Whether you're choking guys out or just knocking them down, the game really excels at just making you feel like an unstoppable force. Yeah, it's possible to play the game like this, but the best thing to do is to go in and breach super quick, up close and personal, and just take everybody out in a flash, which in general is kind of the opposite of how the game usually wants you to play. But still, they make it work. It's incredibly fun, and there are very few games that make this feel as satisfying as Metal Gear Solid 5 does.
I knew this was going to be a bad idea.
Boss, I want you down! I need to fend for myself in there, Max!
You were after the girls, not you!
Up next is Cyberpunk 2077. I think this list wouldn't be complete without mentioning Cyberpunk 2077. Here, you can't only showcase your John Wick inner self, but also have John Wick be on your side. Well, not John Wick as we know him, but Johnny Silverhand, a military veteran who fought the corrupt. He died, but his digital ghost lives on in your head. He has some good advice, but he's kind of an a-hole, you know? On the flip side, you've got V, the player character, who in Cyberpunk 2077 is essentially what happens if John Wick had the soul of Johnny Silverhand stuck in his head. The player character, with the post-law pistol, V can elevate gunplay to a truly John Wick level, expertly moving through crowds of enemies and blasting heads with ruthless efficiency. The gunplay in this game feels just excellent in general. The different guns all feel distinct. It doesn't have a Max Payne style slow-mo feature that allows you to carefully line up your shots, but it doesn't really need it. With the superior pistol perk, the gun is already fast enough. Adding bullet time would almost make it overkill. There are a lot of really fun guns in this game, but if you want to play super serious, post-law is the way to go. Dual pistols would be cool though, I'm not gonna lie. Finally, we have the game very closer to my heart, My Friend Pedro. Now, if you're looking for something a bit lighter, then My Friend Pedro is a good option. This is a game about performing flips, kicks, and shooting bad guys in the face, while being directed by a walking banana named Pedro. So yeah, lighter. Essentially, it's about clearing rooms full of enemies in an effective and creative way, but you have to do it stylishly. In a way, it's almost like a puzzle game that challenges you to think about how to approach a situation, use what's available, and eliminate all the bad guys as smoothly as possible. Sometimes you just breeze through it without much thought, and other times you have to slow things down to carefully plan out your moves. So beyond all the backflips and wall bounces and generally ludicrous action, and your constant companion that guides you through the game, it's a really fun game. It's not super long, and it's pretty cheap. So if any of what I said sounds interesting to you, My Friend Pedro is worth a look. It's available on essentially everything too, so there's no excuse to miss. There you have it, 15 games to live out some kind of John Wick fantasy. Of course, there are significantly more games where you just run around and pew-pew like him, but we wanted to highlight specific ones where you get the whole vibe, the essence, if that makes sense. Now, if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. But as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.